My name is Sarah Mortis. I'm 33, and for the past 6 years, I've cultivated a healthcare tech company from the soil up, methodically, purposefully, and well beyond the glow of the spotlight my family never extended to me. Tonight, I sat at my brother's engagement dinner, yet another flawless, curated celebration designed to exhibit his accomplishments like fine art. The Mortis are a clan rooted in legacy, in the predictable rhythm of excellence. My brother Charles is a physician, my parents, both lauded graduates of elite universities. And me? I was the deviation, spoken of rarely, regarded with hushed sympathy, often invisible. That is, until Charles's fiancée Jessica tilted her head across the table and asked, "Wait, Mortis? Are you Sarah Mortis? The founder of Medieval?" Silence spread like a slow tide. Forks hung midair. My mother blinked twice. My father stared as though I were a stranger. And I smiled, not because that recognition was the goal, but because it marked the shift. Growing up in a home like mine meant triumph wasn't optional. It was doctrine, demanded and delineated like statute. My father, Dr. Daniel Mortis, was a renowned cardiothoracic surgeon in Philadelphia. My mother, Nancy, a litigator formidable enough to make seasoned associates stumble. And Charles, he was the golden boy, the paragon, the one who followed every guideline and basked in every accolade. Dinner wasn't dialogue, it was a symposium. Charles would recount clinical rotations, co-authored papers, or patient recoveries. My parents would beam, nodding like conductors to a symphony. Then they'd turn their gaze toward me with measured civility. "And you, Sarah?" "I taught myself Python this week," I'd say, my pulse thudding. "How quaint," my mother would murmur, eyes fixed on her wine. "But really, darling, you should consider getting back on the pre-law track. It's far more stable." What they considered stable, I found stifling. What they called success, I felt as suffocation. There was no room in that household for wonder, only roadmaps. Only futures stamped and sealed in prestige. At 16, I built a rudimentary hospital scheduling app for a school fundraiser. The event coordinator praised it as a gift. My mother gave a thin smile and replied, "Yes, but we're hoping she'll pursue something viable, like law or healthcare administration." That word, viable. As if daring to dream outside their mold was inherently doomed. I once slid a printed copy of my code beneath my dad's newspaper at breakfast, silently hoping he'd notice. He didn't. He nudged it aside to reach his coffee. That absence of acknowledgement cut deeper than mockery ever could. When Charles was accepted into medical school, they threw a grand celebration. That same week, I qualified for the state tech finals. "Maybe next time, sweetheart," my mother said. "Your brother's big moment has already been arranged." I went anyway, on my own, and won first place. I returned home, trophy in hand. No one asked how it went. They were still toasting Charles's admission to Columbia Presbyterian. I tucked the award in my closet, a silent testament to the person I was becoming, unseen, perhaps, but undeterred. That night, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't scramble for their attention. I would grow beyond the need for their approval, quietly, entirely. Someday, I would create something undeniable, something that spoke for itself. College felt like my first breath of fresh air. I enrolled in a rigorous, lesser-known tech institute in the Pacific Northwest, far from Philadelphia. There no one cared who the Mortis were. I wasn't Charles's sister. I was just Sarah, the girl who read code like poetry. Sophomore year, I met Barbara. She was incisive, insatiably curious, and equally weary of the traditional path. We'd code until 2 in the morning, not for grades, but because we were chasing a vision. There was a natural kinship between us, the kind that forms when two souls recognize each other at their core. Neteva began as an idea scrawled on a napkin, a secure, user-friendly platform to mend the communication fractures in healthcare. Barbara had lost her uncle due to a medication oversight. I had watched my grandmother suffer through 3 misdiagnoses. We didn't just see the flaws, we believed we could mend a piece of the system. While our peers lined up corporate internships, we were soldering together a prototype in Barbara's basement, subsisting on takeout and spotty Wi-Fi. Her parents were unwavering in their support, delivering snacks, asking thoughtful questions, even helping us with LLC paperwork. Meanwhile, my parents assumed I was dabbling in freelance IT. I let them. It was easier than enduring another sermon about real careers and fallback plans. Each attempt to share what we were creating met with blank stares, as if I were speaking in static. That dull dismissal drained me more than outright disapproval. By senior year, we won a statewide innovation competition. The prize money allowed us to formalize our company, and a supportive professor introduced us to our first client, a hospital administrator named Dr. Richard, who saw in us what others didn't: purpose. That contract changed the tide. We relocated to a tiny apartment in Riverfront, just outside Portland, and dove into 18-hour days. I still remember the month we couldn't afford rent, so we bartered a custom website in exchange for 1 month's grace. Our landlord agreed. Step by step, Metava gained traction. We pitched to angel investors. We brought on Michael, a brilliant back-end developer who'd left MIT to chase his own truth. We signed a regional hospital group, then another. Each victory was quiet, shared only between us, but each one sparked a quiet awe. We were really doing it. We were building something that mattered. I never told my family. Not when we passed 100,000 users. Not when our first $3 million in funding hit the bank. They never asked. Charles had just been named chief resident. In the annual holiday updates my parents sent out, I was still exploring options or involved in some tech venture. I didn't bother correcting them. It wasn't revenge, it was protection. I wanted to keep what I'd built untarnished, untouched by people who'd once called it a distraction. But real success, no matter how quietly earned, eventually makes itself known. By 30, Metava had crossed the $80 million mark in valuation. Our software had been deployed in over 120 hospitals nationwide. We had a solid team, a functioning HR department, and a growing waitlist of clients. Barbara and I had already walked away from 3 buyout offers. We weren't done building. Then one morning, an unfamiliar name appeared in my inbox: Jessica. She was the director of strategic development at a large health tech conglomerate called Horizon. Her email was polished, cordial, and exploratory, testing the waters. She proposed a meeting to discuss potential alignment between our organizations. I read it again, then once more, and then I Googled her. That's when I saw it. Jessica was engaged to Charles. I didn't say a word, not to Barbara, not to Patricia, not even to the person paid to help me untangle things emotionally. I just sat with the irony. The woman preparing to join my family was also trying to acquire my life's work. Of course, she hadn't yet connected the dots. I'd always kept my public presence minimal: no profile pictures, no TED Talks, just vague mentions in niche tech media. Within industry circles, I was more legend than figurehead, the invisible architect behind Metava. But she'd eventually figure it out. With the engagement dinner coming up, it was no longer a question of if, but when. My mother called 3 times that week. Make sure you look presentable. Jessica's family is accomplished, and we'd like to make the right impression. Translation: don't show up looking like a startup founder. Don't worry, I told her. I'll keep it refined. I chose a black dress, clean lines, modest cut, subtly commanding. Not a statement, a declaration. I didn't need to look powerful. I simply was. The dinner was held at Lumiere, an upscale restaurant perched above the bay in downtown San Francisco: steel beams, curved glass, soft candlelight. The kind of place where silence feels designed. I arrived right on time. Not early enough to be enlisted in last-minute details. Not late enough to draw attention. Just there. Charles greeted me like always, with easy confidence and that perfectly practiced warmth. Liv, glad you could come. Then came Jessica. She was gracious, poised, dressed in quiet wealth and control. The kind of woman my mother always hoped I'd find a version of myself in. I shook her hand, congratulated her. She smiled, unsuspecting. Champagne was poured. Toasts followed. My father beamed as he recounted Charles's latest publication in the American Journal of Neurology. My mother dabbed her eyes, recalling his childhood science fair glory. No one mentioned me. I was seated beside a cousin who looked surprised to see me at all. Still figuring things out, she asked with vague concern. "I'm in health tech," I said simply. "Oh, like a fitness tracker app or something?" she asked, already half distracted. "Something along those lines." Midway through dinner, my uncle leaned over the table with a hushed tone. "Charles says Apple might have a junior role lined up for you. Could be a good foot in the door." I smiled gently. "Thanks, but I'm good where I am." And then I saw Jessica watching me, really watching me. Her gaze narrowed slightly, not suspicious, but curious. Something in her posture shifted, as if a name had just floated up from memory. "Sarah Mortis," she repeated, brows knit. "Your last name is Mortis?" Charles chuckled, completely at ease. "Of course. She's my sister." Jessica slowly set her utensils down. Her expression turned serious. "Wait, you're Sarah Mortis? The one behind Medevald?" The air collapsed. The entire table went still. Forks froze midair. Even the servers seemed to hesitate. "That's me," I said quietly. "You're the Sarah Mortis?" "Co-founder of Meteva." My mother looked like someone had appended her drink in her lap. My father sat suspended, halfway to a sip of wine. Jessica turned to Charles, eyes wide. "You never told me your sister was the CEO of Meteva, the company we've been in acquisition talks with for over a month." Charles blinked like she'd spoken in another language. "What? No. Sarah? There's no way. My sister does IT work." "She's not. I mean, she's not just in tech," Jessica said firmly. "She's the reason we're offering over $200 million. Her platform is saving hospitals. We've been negotiating with her executive team for weeks." The silence that followed was nearly theatrical. Then, slowly, everyone turned to face me. My mother's hand clenched her necklace. My father looked as though someone had knocked the air from his chest. Charles just stared, as if seeing me for the first time. "Is that true?" he finally asked. "Yes," I answered. "Barbara and I started Meteva in a basement with 2 laptops and a borrowed router. Today, we're in over 300 hospitals across the U.S. No one responded. Not even Jessica, who now regarded me with something between admiration and apology. The rest of dinner passed in a daze. Family members who hadn't asked a single question about my life in years now wanted to talk investments, scaling strategy, and IPOs. My mother casually remarked on 3 separate occasions that I'd always had a gift with computers. My father insisted he'd mentioned my company to several colleagues back in the early days. I let them have their stories. I didn't need to rewrite them. Charles was the only one who stayed mostly quiet. Processing. Reassembling every assumption he'd carried about me. At one point, he reached for his drink, missed the stem, and simply let his fingers rest on the table like he wasn't sure what they were meant to do anymore. After dessert, Jessica pulled me aside by the window. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That wasn't my intention, to out you like that." I shook my head. It was bound to come out sooner or later. She studied me for a moment. "Well, for what it's worth, your work is extraordinary. Our analysts can't stop talking about the impact. And now I understand why your team is so guarded. You didn't just build a product. You built something with soul." I looked at her, this woman who might become my sister-in-law, and realized she understood more about my purpose than my family ever had. "Thank you," I said, and I meant every word. That night, I left without looking back. For so many years, I had imagined the moment they'd finally see me. Now that it had happened, I realized something unexpected. Their acknowledgement didn't redefine me. It didn't complete me. I had already become whole without it. The next morning, my phone pulsed with notifications, a bright cascade of messages I hadn't anticipated. The first was from my mother. "We need to talk. Brunch tomorrow. Monarch Hotel. 11 sharp." Then came one from my father. "So proud. Let's catch up soon." And hours later, "Charles, why didn't you ever tell me?" His message stayed on my screen the longest. I hadn't told them because I didn't want to hand them the power to shape the narrative. I wasn't sure what would be worse, being ignored again, or only being claimed once I was undeniably successful. Still, I agreed to brunch. Some truths can only be carried alone for so long. They were already seated when I walked into the Monarch, dressed as though attending a firm-wide review. My mother wore a structured cream blazer, my father his crisply folded navy sport coat. There was a stiffness to their posture, like they weren't sure whether to treat me as their daughter or a visiting dignitary. "Sarah," my father said, rising halfway into a formal, uncertain embrace. "You look great. Very polished." My mother got straight to it. "I've been reading everything, your company's growth, the funding milestones, the recognition. It's astounding." She paused, then leaned forward. "But why didn't you share any of it with us?" I unfolded the linen napkin and laid it across my lap. "Because the last time I tried, you told me to apply for a front desk job." My father stiffened. "We were just trying to offer stability. Something practical." "No," I said quietly, holding his eyes. "You were trying to correct something that wasn't broken." My mother's expression faltered. We didn't know how to respond. The tech world seemed chaotic, so fast-moving, so risky. "And medicine isn't? Law doesn't shift beneath your feet. Those paths have rules," she said, reaching. "Structure. And that's what made mine so threatening," I said, nodding. "You couldn't define it." My father let out a weary breath. "But you're obviously brilliant. We always saw that." "No," I corrected softly. "You saw what you hoped I'd become. That's not the same as seeing me." The waiter arrived with coffee, offering a momentary break. I stirred a splash of cream into mine, letting the silence stretch, controlled and calm. "I spent years building something that mattered to me," I said once he stepped away. "And every time I tried to explain it, I was dismissed. Eventually, I stopped trying." My mother lowered her voice. "We thought you were drifting. That you'd lost your direction." "I wasn't lost," I said. "I just stopped following your map." The silence was thin as ice, but it didn't shatter. "We love you," she said at last, quieter than before. I nodded. "I know. But when love lacks respect, it doesn't always feel like love." For a moment, my father looked like a man meeting the weight of hindsight for the first time. What followed was gentler, less performance, more curiosity. They asked real questions: how Barbara and I met, where our first tiny office had been, how we managed to land our earliest hospital partnerships. My mother admitted she'd read an article about early-stage funding, but gave up halfway through. It was the most honest moment we'd shared in years. "We didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't matter," my father said, almost apologetic. "I know," I said. "But intent doesn't erase the impact. That's what I've been healing from." He gave a slow nod. "You did it. Even without us." When we parted, there were no grand reconciliations, just a promise to meet for dinner the following week. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. A few nights later, Charles knocked on my door, balancing a bottle of Cabernet and a pastry box. "I tried to bake," he said, sheepish. "Turns out I still can't. So I bought croissants. Backup plan." "Classic Charles," I said, smiling. We sat on the living room floor, backs against the couch, just like when we were kids sneaking midnight snacks. Through the windows, the Seattle skyline blinked in the distance. "I need to say something," he said, no preamble. "I owe you an apology." I turned, unsure what was coming next. "I believe them. That you were drifting, that you hadn't found your thing. But now I know you weren't aimless, you were building something none of us had the vision to recognize. And I never asked. That's on me." "You weren't alone," I said. "But you're the one sitting here now." He raised his glass. To the black sheep. I tapped mine to his. To the sheep who built a legacy. We laughed, and it was real. The kind of laugh that closes a wound. That moment meant more than every headline or acquisition offer, because he wasn't just impressed. He finally understood. 6 months later, everything had changed, but not in the ways I once imagined. Yes, Horizon finalized the acquisition. Neteva became the cornerstone of their global health innovation division. Barbara took the reins as Chief Strategy Officer. I accepted the title of Head of Innovation, tasked with expanding our impact across continents. My new office overlooked the bay, the view once symbolic of impossibility. Now it was just mine. But the real change? It was subtler. It was my mother texting me a link to an article titled Top Women Reshaping Tech, with a message that read, "She reminds me of you." Do you know her? It was my father attending a product demo and nodding, not because he understood every chart or acronym, but because he finally believed in the work. It was Charles casually referencing a paper I co-authored during grand rounds like it was second nature. And it was me no longer playing small, no longer translating myself, hosting monthly dinners for young women in tech and science, reminding them that the work they do matters, even if no one claps. One afternoon, a high school student I was mentoring looked at me with wide, searching eyes and asked, "Do you ever wish your family had believed in you from the beginning?" I paused, the question settling into me like a stone in water. Sometimes, I said honestly. It would have made the path less steep. But maybe it also would have made me softer. She nodded slowly, still too young to fully understand the trade-off. So I added, "There's a quiet strength that comes from building in solitude. When no one else claps, you learn to be your own source of certainty. And once you find that, no one can take it away." I revisit that thought often, because it's the truth I had been walking toward all along without realizing. Recognition is lovely, but it dims. Conviction? That endures. That evening, standing beside the tall glass of my office window, I watched the city unfurl beneath a sky dusted with gold. The lights shimmered like echoes of all the late nights that led me here. And I smiled not because they finally saw who I was, but because I had never needed their gaze to become her. Not truly. Because success, in its truest form, isn't about disproving the people who doubted you. It's about becoming someone you never have to convince. And living every day like you already know.